Greetings, welcome, and thank you for clicking. I'm Christian of Standing Stones Healing Company, supporting your journey with healing experiences, coaching, and encouragement for life's changes, challenges, and transitions. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Ask the Stones, offering spiritual guidance and encouragement for life's challenging questions. Welcome, and thank you for joining me for this episode of Ask the Stones. This episode's question is from David, who writes, "My question is long, so bear with me. I want to give you the full situation. I have been working remotely for the past year, and my employer just gave us notice that we are returning to the office in June. Problem is, I don't want to go back. I have a demanding and stressful job that has been less work for the past year. Plus, I've been able to spend more time with my son and know going back to normal will mean working evenings and weekends again. I was considering leaving before the pandemic and hate the thought of going back to that. But I'm doubtful I can make as much money. We're in a good place financially, but I don't want to burden my wife. Maybe what I really need is some courage, but I just want to be a good husband and father. Do you have any advice? Oh, and one more thing. My wife reads the tarot and I collect dragons. Will you pick a tarot card for me?" David. Yes, of course, David. Thank you. I will be happy to pick a tarot card for you. And for those of you listening and thinking, what do dragons have to do? What does the fact that he collects dragons have to do with the tarot? I do read the Celtic Dragon Tarot. So thanks, David. And yes, I will be happy to pick a Celtic Dragon tarot card for you for this situation. And I want to say thank you for bringing this situation to Ask the Stones. I greatly appreciate it, and I am honored to be able to offer some thoughts on this situation for you. So thank you, David. David, I have a few things to say about this situation. I want to say first and foremost that it does seem to me that you know what you want. Well, I will say first, you know what you don't want, and that's to go back to the way things were. But David, knowing what we don't want is oftentimes just as helpful as knowing what we do want. A lot of times we may have the tendency to think that knowing what we don't want isn't so helpful, but actually it is, because knowing what we don't want then allows us to turn to what we do want. And so if you know that you don't want to go back to working evenings and weekends, that then allows you to get clarity on what you do want. So, anytime that we are able to say, I don't want this, I don't want that, it allows us to consider what we then do want. And we can flip that thing that we don't want on its opposite to come up with what we do want. And so, David, if you don't want to work evenings or weekends, it sounds to me like what you do want is to have a job that isn't quite so demanding and a job that allows you to have evenings and weekends free. And David, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that you want those evenings and weekends so that you can spend more time with your son. You say that you've been able to spend more time with him. And when you say that going back to normal will mean evenings and weekends, what that says to me is that going back to normal will not allow you to spend as much time as with your son as you've been able to over the past year. Which has been a wonderful thing for you, I'm sure, David. I'm sure that that has been very rewarding for you. And I'm going to hope, assume, guess that it has been for your son as well. You know, you say, David, that you just want to be a good husband and father. And I do want to say that wanting to spend more time with your son and even potentially foregoing salary in order to spend more time with your son is something that a good father very well may say. A good father is someone who most likely would want to spend time with their children. And so I know that you want to be a good father. I know that you want to do what's right for your family. And some may say, David, that spending more time with your son is the right thing to do for your family. So, David, you know, you say that maybe what you need is just some courage. You know, like I said, it seems to me like you know what you do want, and that the quote advice that you're looking for isn't whether or not to stay. It isn't, do I go back to this normal working experience? Do I go back to the way it was before the pandemic? To the way it was being in the office? To me, it seems like you already know the answer to that, and that your request for advice does not center on whether or not to go back. Because in reading your question, honestly, it seems pretty clear to me that you really don't want to go back. And so I cannot say definitively, David, what you should do. I can only say to you that it seems very clear to me from your question that going back is not in your heart. As a matter of fact, interestingly enough, David, you say, maybe what I really need is some courage. And courage comes from the old French word courage. And it means heart. Courage in Old French is heart. And so when we talk about courage, we are actually talking about what is in our heart. So, interestingly enough, David, you know, what is in your heart to me is not going back to the way things were. Your heart is not in it. And interestingly, courage is all about the heart. I want to encourage you, David, to do some exploration of your heart. And I know that when you do some exploration of your heart, you're really going to be clear in there about not wanting to go back. And I can say that with certainty, David, just based upon your question and the way that you asked it. There's nothing in here about an interest in going back. You say quite clearly that you don't want to go back to normal. And even, David, that you were considering leaving before the pandemic. And you hate the thought of going back to the way it was before the pandemic. So, in your heart, your courage, you really don't want to go back to the way things were. And so, to me, it's not even a question of do you go back or not. To me, David, the answer in your heart is no. But I do want to say a couple more things about this, David, because that's not the end of it, you know? Answers to life's challenging questions are rarely a simple yes or no. Otherwise, they wouldn't be challenging questions, would they? If it was a simple answer, then we wouldn't need to ask the question. But what I'm thinking about this, David, is that you have multiple possibilities and options. Number one being, perhaps you may want to consider, can you go back to this job, but not back to the way it was before the pandemic? So is there flexibility for you in this? Is there a way that you could stay with your employer or stay in the job and make some adjustments? Maybe shift your job duties, reduce your hours, maybe take on a new position within the same company, maybe working remotely. You know, many companies are making the shift to that work. They realize that they can save money by having their employees work remotely. It's a lot cheaper for them, and that it does improve feelings of positivity. Actually, though, David, I recently heard about the idea of going fully remote, and that many employees actually receive the most benefit from working from home emotionally and psychologically with a hybrid kind of a work experience where they're working from home a few days and then in the office a couple of days. So that may be something that you might be interested in and that your employer might be interested in too. So that's something to consider as well. So what I'm saying, David, is that it doesn't necessarily need to be a yes or a no. It doesn't necessarily need to be a this or that type of consideration. Meaning that if you approach your employer, you may have more options than either going back to normal completely or done. So take that into consideration. That's a possibility for you. You may also, though, be saying, David, no, I'm really done. Like when I look into my heart is not in it. And it's not in it in terms of the company, in terms of the job, in terms of whatever. My heart is just not in it. And that's okay too. So if that's the case, then David, considering what your other options are outside of this workplace, yes, maybe it may mean a reduction in income, but you don't know that for certain. Maybe you are making a great income that it's going to be a challenge for you to find elsewhere, but not necessarily. So I encourage you to be open to the possibility that you may be able to find something that pays just as well or even better. So I encourage you to open yourself up to that possibility that leaving this job does not necessarily mean a big pay cut for you. I also want to say, David, that you mentioned that you don't want to be a burden to your wife. We're in a good place financially, but I don't want to burden my wife. And my question for you is, David, have you talked to your wife about that? You may be saying you don't want to burden her and that you're going to burden her without actually knowing whether or not it would be a burden on her. So I might recommend, if you have not already, talking to your wife and asking her what her thoughts are. If you end up leaving your job, if you end up with a reduced salary, whatever those possibilities are, I encourage you, David, to have a conversation with your wife about it. You're making the assumption that if you made less money, that you would be a burden. But you don't know that. And, David, you may even, I'm going to be completely bold faced honest right now. You may be in that thinking that making less money would be making less money than your wife and therefore being a burden. And if that would be the case, I really want to challenge you to explore that within yourself, and that possibility of your wife making more money than you are, and how that might feel for you, and why you might feel some resistance to that. Now, I'm making a big assumption here, David. Maybe your wife already does make more money than you. I'm only assuming it because you're talking about being a burden to her. And my assumption is that if she were already making more money than you, then it wouldn't be a concern for you to be a burden to her. So I may be in my assumption completely wrong, so I want to make sure to throw that out there, my thinking on this. But if my assumption is correct, I really, David, want you to explore that within yourself, and why you might be feeling that you would be a burden if you made less, and why you have resistance to that, and why you might feel like you're a burden. And of course, like I said, talk to your wife about it. You're assuming that you would be a burden, that she would feel negatively about it, when maybe you just don't know. So I encourage open dialogue with your wife, honesty and communication with her about that. Wow, David. I want to say a couple more things about this situation. I did have a question like this recently from Marta. And Marta was looking to leave her job as well. Now, her situation was a little bit different, David. She was being bullied at work and considering leaving. But I bring up that question because that was a few episodes ago. You may want to go back and listen to it. It was episode number 18. David, I bring that up because I encouraged Marta to find a job before she quit her job. Now, in all fairness to Marta, she had a workplace bullying going on, and so perhaps the leaving of her job was a little more urgent than the leaving of your job, David. So, you say that you're going back to the office in June, but it doesn't mean that you have to find a job by June. It means that you could return to the office with the knowledge that you are job searching and are going to leave as soon as you find something else. So returning to, quote, normal, returning to pre-pandemic work experiences, with the knowledge that this is going to be temporary and you're going to be gone as soon as you find something else. So that's a possibility for you too. Just because you're going back to the office in June doesn't mean that you absolutely have to quit or leave or find another job before then. So I encourage you to consider your timelines and consider what you're willing to tolerate in terms of if you're willing to tolerate going back to the office for a length of time and what that length of time is for yourself. So considering all of those possibilities and angles. As far as the courage part, David, what can I say to instill some courage? What I can say is that this is a scary thing. Let's admit that. Let us all admit that leaving something that we are familiar with is scary. even if that something that we are familiar with is not something that we like. Or in your case, David, something that we are dreading returning to. Let's admit that it is a challenge to leave something that is familiar, even if we want to leave it. Because in leaving the familiar, we are, of course, going towards the unfamiliar, the unknown. That's what's really, I think, David, what you're looking for in terms of the courage. It's maybe to not fear the unknown. And we are always all gonna have some fear of the unknown. The unknown is always going to be a scary kind of thing. And so, David, there is nothing I can say that is going to erase any fear that you have. Because that fear is going to happen. There's this great book, David, called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Susan Jeffers. It's a little book. I highly recommend reading it. And Susan Jeffers talks all about the fact that when you stretch out of your comfort zone, you are going to feel fear. So, David, when you look to leave your job, you are going to feel fear. This is a normal thing. Anytime we try something new, anytime we stretch outside of our comfort zone, we are, of course, bumping up against the limits of familiarity and comfort. And that's going to feel uncomfortable, and that's going to feel fearful. And knowing that you're going to feel that fear and that that is a normal part of growing is something that can help you to move forward. So just acknowledging the fact that, yep, I am going to feel the fear when I am leaving my job. That can be helpful, just to recognize, everyone, that that is normal. That is a normal part of doing new things. Now, I do want to throw in a caveat here and say, I'm not advocating feeling the fear of jumping off a bridge and doing it anyway. I am not advocating any kind of self-harm or pushing past any kind of fear that actually is really great for survival. So I'm not talking about things like, yes, just give in to the peer pressure and try that drug. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we are going to feel fear even in these kinds of situations, and that acknowledging that we are going to feel that fear is important to help us step past it. So, David, acknowledge that fear. The fact that you might need courage. Well, courage is not about not having fear. Courage is about feeling the fear and doing it anyway. So, when you are looking for courage, David, I cannot erase any fear that you have. There is no magic word that I can say to take away your fear of stepping into the unknown. Courage, rather, is about doing it even though you feel the fear. And David, I think that one really powerful way for you to feel courageous is to look at your son. I think if you look at your son and consider that what you want to be doing is being a good father, being a good husband, that, David, I think, is going to give you a lot of courage. Doing what is right for your son, what is right for your wife, for your family. I think that is really going to help to give you courage. I encourage you, David, to look at your son, to remember the times that you've been able to spend with him over this past year, the ways that you've been able to expand and grow as a father, the ways that you have been able to show up for him. And I encourage you to think on that to help you feel courage. That, to me, David, is what is in your heart, your love for your son. That, to me, is at the center of all of this. That, to me, is the greatest motivating factor for you based upon your question and based upon the information you've provided me. So, David, I think if you put your focus on your son, that love for him is going to help you with your courage. You know, one thing, David, that I also recommend for gaining courage and for seeing perspectives of situations and, you know, for gaining a new perspective and for encouraging ourselves and instilling courage is something that I like to call pretend you're a friend. And David, it is exactly that. So one way that I encourage people to advocate for themselves and to help encourage themselves is to pretend that they are their friend. So David, I want to encourage you to look at your situation as though you are your friend. So look at it not as David, but look at this situation as David's friend. And what would David's friend say to David about this situation? What would David's friend say to pump him up? What would David's friend say to cheer him on? What would David's friend say to him about this situation? So, David, pretend you are a friend. And what would you say to your friend about this? If I were a friend of David, I might say, David, I think you want to leave your job. I think you were thinking about it before the pandemic. And I think deep in your heart, deep in your old French courage, you know that this is not the right thing for you. So I encourage you, David, to consider what you would like instead. So if this is not what you want, to consider instead what you do want. And David, I would even recommend sitting down and making a list of the things that you do want. And remember, knowing what we don't want can lead us to what we do want. So if you need to start with what you don't want, great. That is a wonderful place to start. Start there, David. Start with what you don't want, and then turn that list into what you do want. And put your focus on what you do want. Remember, David, you have multiple possibilities. This situation does not mean that you have to leave your job. If you search your heart and you really would ideally love to stay, except for the evenings and the weekends, then you may want to consider having that conversation with your employer. This may also mean finding a position where you are working remotely, or a position where you are working part-time, or any other number of things. There are plenty of possibilities. Because if you do decide, David, that this ultimately is really not what you want, even with a hybrid schedule, even with working remotely, whatever the case might be, if you determine that this employer is not where you want to be and that you are going to be searching for another position, lost my train of thought there, David. I have no idea where I was going with that. Even if you determine that those things are all what you don't want, you have a lot of options and possibilities available to you. So I'm going to encourage you to get some clarity on what you do want and to move forward toward that. It can be very helpful for us to consider what we are moving toward rather than on what we are moving away from. So I encourage you, David, to think about what you want rather than what you don't want. And it is pretty clear that you want to spend more time with your son. And David, in my estimation, that is being a good father. And when you can be a good father, it increases your chances of being a good husband. And so I want to encourage you to think about and consider those things. David, I'm going to send you some Reiki, and I'm going to send you some Reiki for your work situation. And I want to send Reiki to everyone who's listening, your work situation. Because work, of course, is a major aspect of our lives. And it can often be a challenging aspect of our lives. Even when we love our jobs, even when we have our quote dream job, which, by the way, I don't think there is any one dream job for you. I think that there are multiple jobs out there that would be a dream for you to have. So I don't believe that there's one dream job and that you have to find that one dream job. I think that there are multiple jobs out there that would be an excellent fit for each one of us. I digress. But even in a dream job, there are things that we don't like about it, and things that we prefer not to do, and aspects that we don't really care for. And so even for you listening, if you have a dream job, I am going to still send Reiki to your job and your workplace experience, because this is a big aspect of our lives. And again, as always, if you don't want the Reiki to go to that, the Reiki doesn't need to go to that. It won't go to that. Don't worry. And if there's another intention that you would like the Reiki to go to, very well, absolutely set that intention. And David, I'm also going to send Reiki, set that intention for Reiki for the relationship with your son and your wife too, including for those challenging conversations that you're going to be having if you have not been having them already. So I invite us all to just take a few deep cleansing breaths to clear our energy. Thank you, David, for that honor, and to all those listening, thank you. David, as I sent Reiki, I saw a blue ball of light, a light blue. It was robin egg colored, a little lighter than a robin's egg color. I want to encourage you to picture that light blue light around you at this time. So picture yourself surrounded in that beautiful light blue empowering light, calming, empowering, beautiful blue light. And I encourage you also to picture that light blue light around the three of you as well. So, David, per your request, I'm going to pull a Celtic Dragon Tarot card for you. And let's see what the angels might have to say about this situation and what guidance they might have for you at this time. All right, David, we have right on top here the Magician, number 1. Tell your wife about this. So the Magician, of course, is all about making magic. And what I'm getting from this card, David, for you at this time is that, yes, this is a time for you to work some magic. This is a time for you to make some changes. This is a time for you to harness some powers, maybe your job search powers. This is a time for you to manifest, a time for you to get clarity about what you want and then bring that into your life. So this is a great card to have at this time, David. This is a wonderful card to pull for this particular situation and experience. What it is saying to me is that the time is right for you to make some magic in your life out of this work situation. Now, I don't know exactly what that means for you. Only you know. Once you look into your heart, only you know what that means for you. So I encourage you to look into your heart, to get some clarity. And I feel really positive about your ability to make that happen with this great card. I also feel good about your ability to make it happen, David, simply because you are leading from a place of love. You are leading from a place of love for your son and your wife. And when you lead from a place of love, you cannot go wrong. So, David, time for some magic in your life. Let that love guide you and work that workplace magic for yourself and your family. David, thank you so much for bringing this situation to Ask the Stones. I greatly appreciate it. And thank you all for listening. It is a wonderful pleasure to come to you every week with Ask the Stones. And again, as always, if you have a question for Ask the Stones, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Send me an email. I'm at christian@standingstoneshealing.com, or send me a message on Facebook at Standing Stones Healing, where you can connect with me. And I am always honored to encourage you through your life changes, challenges, and transitions with Reiki, card reading, and coaching. Thank you, and best wishes for your journey. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Ask the Stones. If you have a question for Ask the Stones, please send me an email at christian@standingstoneshealing.com or connect with me on Facebook at Standing Stones Healing. Thank you, and best wishes for your journey.